Before we started Horsemeat, the gay scene was very kind of sort of segregated and tribalistic. You had the kind of clubs that were, you know, sort of your more soulful house clubs, you had your electro clubs, you had your muscle sort of circuit parties, and then sort of ultimately you sort of had the Bear thing, and nothing really kind of came together. It was all very kind of separate, and lost a lot of it had lost its way. It became such a kind of money-making endeavour and a commercial endeavour that a lot of clubs it was just a place for people to go, pick up, take drugs, and that was it. It wasn't that they were getting much bang for their buck. So that's kind of where we kind of fitted into it in a way to try and do some, or have a different take on it and move away from that kind of more commercial side and play music that was, you know, not really being played and a bit more interesting, something that actually I liked for a change.
Yeah, the reason why kind of disco music classics weren't played at the end of the night in this country as like they were in New York was because the music that was embraced here was a lot harder. It was more about techno, it was more about hard house. There was a few places, I have to say, I used to play disco at the end of Queer Nation, but I was very much inspired by going to New York, so I was just copying what I was seeing happening there. So the last half hour, you know, play Just Us or Oh I Love It or Runaway or something, you know, because I'd seen great DJs doing that, and I thought, and it's a nice way as well, because I found just house music all night quite monotonous, so it's a nice way to sort of bring the party to a close. But yeah, people didn't really do that very much here, so I'm not really sure. New York changed a lot, even though we're inspired by New York. I was inspired a lot by going to New York in the early 90s, and you could still hear lots of old classics at lots of different places. But then New York changed to the sort of tribal sound. A lot of the big parties became, you know, tribal house circuit music, and almost I think that tradition of playing disco even died out a bit there, because when we've played in America, or I've met a lot of Americans who've come here, or I've met them in Berlin and they've heard what we're playing and they've really enjoyed it. They've been like, oh my God, I haven't heard this for years. And so I think, I don't know why, I guess it just depends what's happening at any given moment in the scene, or what DJs are doing and what the big parties are. I think Body and Soul kept the tradition alive, but now that's not really going, is it? I don't think so. I think that English people or British people get quite obsessive about things, music particularly. So I think there's been a lot of, you know, like people in New York have like lived it, but I think people here have kind of obsessed about it. So in a way, we've kept the flame burning a lot for like disco, and it's like that sort of train spotter sort of gene that we must have over here, where we want to know about everything, and you know, like Northern Soul and stamp collecting.
I guess I still get a lot of inspiration from kind of, well, clubs that I've never been to, like the Garage and the Saint and you know, all those kind of legendary New York clubs. I mean, just reading about them and sort of like reading, you know, what kind of happened there, that's always inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference between the Saint and Garage musically, they may have begun, I'm not sure when the Saint actually began, but I think
bit later than the Garage.
Yeah, 79, 80 or something. So, yeah, I suppose the Saint embraced the fast Euro disco that became high energy, and it had a much whiter clientele, and it was very much a clone club. Clones being guys from the 70s and 80s that all had moustaches and wore kind of lumberjack shirts and the kind of village people look. Just in case you don't know what a clone is. But yeah, I think it became much more of a sort of boys' town, high energy, West Village of that time place to go. And the Garage was probably a bit more Soho, it was more multiracial, it was more artsy, it was, yeah, I
musically
think
probably more blacker as well, more soulful.
Blacker, Hispanic, and yeah, more soulful music, and playing more of the kind of experimental modern dance music that was around, that didn't have to be fast, it didn't have to, you know, if you listen to a lot of that 80s stuff, it's all over the place. the speed of it. You know, it can be really slow or, you know, faster. And yeah, I guess it was just a different tradition, but I suppose some of the records crossed over because some of the classics were classics
wherever
for everyone, weren't they?
I guess the only sort of places now that you kind of have that kind of like freedom are places like Berlin, you know. I mean, whilst I don't really particularly take a great deal of inspiration musically from Berlin, I think that kind of anything goes kind of atmosphere in terms of kind of creating a party is definitely kind of quite influential and inspirational.
Yeah, I would say Berlin is inspirational.
What do you think is good about Berlin?
I like the way it's kind of a bit grimy. Berlin parties go on late. I don't know, it just seems to be, it reminds me a lot of London in the 80s actually. You know, it's a bit squatty, a bit warehousey, a bit, let's just take over a space and do a party. And I think there's definitely a sort of energy where there's a lot of people that are just living that life of going out. And I think, I'm not sure if it's because they all get good unemployment benefit or whether nobody seems to work.
It's cheap.
Yeah, I think you can live there cheaply, and you could live in London really cheaply in the 80s. So it reminds me of that, and I think that when you can live somewhere cheaply, you get a lot of creativity. So I think there's a lot of people doing interesting things in Berlin. An example of a classic Sleaze record, I think, would be something like Loving You, Losing You by Phyllis Hyman, which starts off quite slow. It is a slow record, it's about 90 BPM. It has this long introduction with lots of strings and it's very dramatic, and then it sort of comes into this crescendo. Phyllis starts singing and it's quite a sad, moving song, and her voice is perfect kind of, she really expresses pain, I suppose, in her voice, and apparently like the Saint people, guys used to, you know, burst into tears listening to that record because it was so moving. And I guess wherever you were in your relationship, whether it was over or whether you couldn't take anymore, you were like, yeah, this is my song. So yeah, that for me is like a classic Sleaze record. And things like Love's Theme by Love Unlimited Orchestra is an instrumental, you know, a pop, disco, crossover, huge record, but I think that just is a very emotive record, isn't it? And I think that was another one that was quite slow, and maybe people would slow dance together as well to these records, you know.
But you also get even like, you know, sort of like more bizarre kind of records like Cliff Richard or something like that could become a Sleaze anthem, or Agneta from ABBA, she had like a couple of solo hits that were, you know, quite big records at the Saint. So, you know, it wasn't, you know, you could take it from anywhere. You could take it from pop music. I'm sure there was probably some rock records that probably went down, you know, at sort of that time in the morning. But yeah, as long as it was kind of, I think it was quite driven by emotion mainly, wasn't it? This kind of like real kind of strings and, you know, kind of quite an emotion.
And I suppose the DJs were sort of trying to take people on a trip throughout the night of kind of intense, fast music where people would dance very hard for long periods of time to, yeah, almost like doing a workout, and then afterwards you kind of slow down, and that would be where you sort of, I guess they would be coming down from their drugs or whatever they would, I don't know what they were taking, but yeah, it would be just the time to kind of pause and breathe and just kind of, yeah.
See the end of the night out nicely, rather than it just like being
ending
at
with
one level, you know, which I guess is a problem that a lot of clubs, you know, have today. It's like, you know, there's only a finite amount of time. It's like your club finishes at 3. You can't bring, you know, Sleaze is the sort of music that you can really only kind of get away with playing after like maybe 5, 6 o'clock, 7 in the morning, you know.
I think also Sleaze, in a way, has many similarities with like Balearic music because it's slow and it comes from all different genres of music, and it kind of, yeah, it's almost like, can you find a piece of music from wherever that fits into this type of moment in the party? And I think Balearic music was kind of originally like that, you know. It's like, let's find something that fits in with the vibe of what we're doing here, whether it's, you know, a pop, a rock, a disco, a dance record, you know, whatever it is. I don't think people were very snobby about music in New York, in the Saint, the way the British people were. They were much more open to pop music and things like that, whereas a lot of the dance music in the UK at the time, it was like, it had to be, you know, black, it had to be sort of street, it had to be, you know, pop music was out. You couldn't play pop music in a kind of soul, funk, disco kind of environment.